Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the English with Grace podcast. This is a centralized hub for students, teachers, and English language learners to practice their English and listen to the differing opinions of other English speakers. The content and focus of this podcast will vary, and my goal is to introduce listeners to a variety of perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences as we discuss topics that are also presented in my English with Grace conversation classes. So I'm very excited to have you here. I hope you enjoy this discussion, and of course, like and subscribe if you like it. And I look forward to seeing you in some of our upcoming conversation classes. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome back to another episode of English with Grace. Today we're going to discuss a very popular topic in my classes, culture shock. And I've invited Lauren, and first I'm going to ask her to introduce herself. Lauren, name, where do you call home, anything else you want to share, and then how do you know me?
Yeah, totally. Hello, thank you for having me on. So my name is Lauren, and I call Pasadena, California, home, so just outside of Los Angeles. I'm actually going to be moving. I went to undergrad in New York, and I'm about to move back there. But Pasadena it'll always have my heart. So
Love that.
definitely.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I know Grace because we were students together for our masters at the
Yes.
Middlebury Institute.
Awesome. Lauren, I'm actually having flashbacks. Did I first meet you in the cohort I led?
There either it was like either that or like
Tucson.
days before in one of the like TESOL TFL
Yes.
Zooms or something. But yes, yeah, Grace was my cohort coordinator. Basically, like for the new students, there would be one previous student who would just kind of lead them through their first semester. And Grace was
You,
awesome.
you poor people. Anyone who had a teacher as a cohort coordinator immediately knew. Like, let's
No,
do
but we knew
icebreakers.
it was gonna be great, and like organized.
Oh, that's so funny. And now I'm having flashbacks to fully online COVID grad school times. So,
Hmm.
wow. Yeah,
Excited to hear.
we haven't met in person yet.
Yeah.
So maybe one day.
I only met our professors at graduation. That was the first time that
Oh,
I met
that's
them.
so wild. Ugh. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I actually forgot that Pasadena is home to you.
Yes.
So coast to coast there. Maybe I'll bring you back for a little coastal comparison
Oh, yeah.
sometime. Okay. And then I'm gonna jump into the first question, which I would like you to also answer the languages you speak, but I think we'll
Mm,
get to that with
yes.
this question. So we're going to talk about culture shock, and my first question is: have you lived abroad, and where did you live?
Yes. So in undergrad, I spent a semester in Harbin, China, and then a semester in Paris, France.
Okay, and
So
yeah,
about languages, those are my main languages, Chinese and French.
awesome. And did you start learning those in undergrad or when you were little? How?
French. So my mom took French in high school and college. And when I was little, I don't really remember this, but she told me that she said, if you learn French, we'll have a secret language. And we can talk to each other in this
Oh, I love
secret
that.
language. And so that might have been why I started. I know I took some classes when I was younger, and then like summer thing at Alliance Française in middle
Mhm.
school. And then in high school is when I started taking it in school. Whereas with Chinese, my middle school had Chinese, and basically they
Oh.
gave us a little, maybe 3 week long taster of Spanish, French, Chinese, and Latin,
Hmm.
and Mandarin. And so as soon as I took Chinese, I was like, wait, because I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take French. I already know. But when I did those 3 weeks of Chinese, I was like, oh, hold up. I have to take this one. And I
Yeah.
even said, like, if I start Chinese now, it'll be easier than if I start it later. So like as
When
an
you were in
11
middle
year old, I
school.
had that thought. Yeah.
Yes. Brilliant.
And so then I took it in school, and then when I got to high school, I had a tutor, and then I took French in school, and then in college I took both of I took Arabic for a little bit, but then
Oh
I
my
was like, I
God.
can't graduate if I take three languages, so I had to stop taking Arabic.
Wow. A true
So
polyglot. I always get that word wrong. Polyglot, right? Like,
yeah, probably.
wow.
But
You.
but not real. Those people are like, 10 and they're fluent.
Oh, okay.
I'm just here with a love of it.
Yes. Which is why I also just enjoyed my time at Miss and in TESOL,
Yes.
TFL. So many language lovers, and we can really
Yes.
get into it. So, okay. And you lived in China for how long? did you say?
It was 3.5 months, and
Okay.
France was 4.5 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would you say you're fluent in both of those? You
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
navigate in the language? Okay.
Yeah.
So then on today's topic, do you think you experienced culture shock?
Yes. So it's really interesting because they prepared us in both situations. They would talk about culture shock and things like that, but you don't really know until you get there,
Hmm.
you're also thinking that it's going to be just like a because of the word shock, like
Yeah.
it's just gonna be one thing that happens and you're like, what? And then, okay. But I feel like a lot of the time it's more just lots of tiny things that you didn't realize were
Hmm.
a part of your life until they're either different or they're not there or something like that. And so
Hmm.
in both places, and also it was more surprising in France because I feel like you go in with the expectation that, oh, it's a similar culture, or in Europe and America, but like, so then it stood out even more when some of the things were different. And so
Yeah.
um yeah, so I definitely
Definitely.
did.
You're making me think of before I went to Spain and Ecuador, they talked about the W. So like right when you
Mm,
get there, you're all
yes.
excited, and then you start to adjust, and then you come back up and adjust to the culture, and then you have to go home and readjust
Yeah.
to U.S.
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah. And I had a bit of a almost language shock in China
Yeah.
because we had so my the two programs were very different. And in China it was really an immersion program, and you had to that we had a language pledge, which I so appreciate because it
Hmm.
just took my Chinese to the next
I
level.
bet.
But because of that, so like you were not allowed to speak English unless you were like calling parents or something.
Oh wow.
Um, and but at a certain point of the semester, my English was weird, and I would be talking to my parents, and like I remember forgetting the word for most one time,
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
just was like the majority of, and like the big part of, because in Chinese, 大部分 means the big part of.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, what? And then like a week later, I was randomly like, most, and so,
I
and that
love that.
happened when I came home too, like
Hmm.
just all of a sudden being back in this English only environment, and I was like,
Hmm.
what's happening?
I
So
bet.
language shock was cool too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something actually I've been experiencing. I think you can relate as a language teacher. I think
Yeah.
my English has gotten worse as I teach it. And I'm going to share this story. My friends have heard it a lot. The other day I was trying to say the word once, like I think that's what
Mm,
she wants.
mm.
And instead of spelling it Wants, I spelled it once, like one time. ONCE. I was like, those two words are the same. Like,
That's
why
so
is English?
funny.
So yeah, the language shock and just language teaching and all of that. I think
Yeah,
I've been thinking about
for
that a lot.
sure.
Um, okay, and then I'm doing a typical Grace thing and going in circles
Yeah,
here.
no problem.
Can you say the name of the town you studied in again? Because in China, because I
Yes.
think my student Miranda, if you're listening, I think this is
Ooh.
where she's from.
Yes, so Harbin, Harbin.
Okay, ice sculptures. Is it in the
Yes,
north? Oh
yeah.
my
It's
God.
the
Okay.
northeastern. People say like if China is in the shape of a chicken, it's the head of the chicken.
Okay.
So
I did a lesson on hometowns the other day, and we got on Google Earth, and I had everybody go to their hometown and talk about it, and I
amazing.
didn't know that. Small world.
Yeah. And
You-
unfortunately, I missed the ice sculptures because I
okay.
went home like a few days, I think, before they put them
Oh.
up. So I was there
Oh.
for all the cold, but then I didn't get the
Didn't get the
sculptures.
reward.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Lauren, we'll go back. Maybe we can meet for the first time in China.
Yes.
Okay, question 3. What shocked you the most? And I'm gonna let you take that however you want it.
Totally, yeah. I mean, and again, so many little things, but one kind of thread, which honestly has been my thread in in the US as well, is just the way that in different places and in different cultures that we talk about and perceive race and ethnicity and identity.
Mhm.
There were so many aspects of that that I didn't realize were very American. And that's another thing too, like part of culture shock is understanding your own culture more because
Mhm.
everyone thinks that their own culture is just that's just how life is, and even when you learn about other cultures, it's hard to really understand that until you're immersed in another culture.
Mhm.
And you see that no, these are there are so many different ways of going about your life, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and in the US, of course, we're always talking about race and ethnicity,
Hmm.
because it's always an issue.
Yeah.
And of course it's an issue everywhere, but like it really is in the fabric of our history and our DNA in this country.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, even here growing up, like people are always confused about my identity because I'm light skinned, but I'm black, and that's just very confusing for people. And I'm not biracial or anything. Both of my
Hmm.
parents are black, and my grandparents are black, and
Hmm.
their parents, you know, and so it just, you know, that's how it is. And you know, as time has gone on, people have gotten more used to that. I've
Hmm.
gotten fewer and fewer comments as the years have gone on. um but outside of the US, people really aren't used to that.
Yeah.
And the big and I want to start by saying, you know, the biggest thing about all of this is patience. Like you cannot go into this kind of situation and expect people to like know these things about you, or to like say certain things, you know, like
Hmm.
it's not their fault that there are certain images of the US that are being sent out, you know. And I feel
Hmm.
like in China that was a big thing.
Hmm.
Just people not comprehending that I was black at all, and being
Yeah.
confused, or being like, wait, what, like, huh, you know. And
Yeah.
I remember literally the first week I was trying to use Chinese to explain it. And I'm like looking up words like slavery, you know,
Oh
like,
my
because I don't
God.
know how to say slavery in Chinese.
Right.
And it was really and to our friends. So in our Chinese program, we each had a roommate who was going to um the Harbin Institute of
Hmm.
Technology. And so that was so great, because I feel like we really got to bond with them, and really understand youth, not I guess we're youth, yeah, like young people
Yeah.
culture in China. um but yeah, that was
Hmm.
something that I was constantly explaining. And
Hmm.
especially because in my program there was another girl who was dark skinned, and so it was obvious that she was black, but people were like, but you don't look like her. And I'm like, yes,
So
I know.
just a constant, like, of you having to explain
Yeah.
your
and
own
and
identity.
yeah, and the hair as well, because people just think that, like someone literally asked me if I curled my hair every day, and I'm like, for anyone who's just listening, you know, my curl pattern is very, very, like the curls are very small.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm thinking, would this be around pencils? Like doing thousands of these every morning around a pencil? You know, like how would I go about this?
Oh my
I don't
gosh.
know.
The amount of time.
Yeah. So it was
Wow.
really funny.
Yeah.
And also, and a kind of fun aspect of being a Westerner that speaks Chinese is people are always surprised,
Yeah.
regardless of your at this if you don't look ethnically Chinese,
Hmm.
people are always surprised, and that's always kind of fun. It's like a fun little like, hey, I do understand. But
Yep.
one time I was in a museum, um, and oh, now I'm trying to remember this little girl. So in Harbin, most people that a lot of people that aren't Chinese are Russian, and
Hmm.
so a lot of times people assume that you're Russian. And a little girl pointed at me and said in Chinese, "Mom, look, she's Russian." And I just responded in Chinese, "Actually, I'm American." And I
Ah!
started walking away, and they literally. I used the word chase. It wasn't like a running high speed chase, but they
Hmm.
followed me through the museum, asking if they could take a video with me
Oh
and a
my
picture with me.
gosh.
And eventually I just said yes. And I got myself into that situation. I should have just not said anything.
Yeah,
But you
but
know, like those kinds of things, and just
hmm.
feelings of otherness and things like
Hmm.
that, um,
Hmm.
were kind of interesting in China. But then in France, uh, it was interesting in a different way, because people are used to light skinned black people in France, because a lot of people are, but they don't always know the history behind it in the
Yeah.
US, because in France it happened very recently. You know, there are
Yeah.
lots of immigrants, or there are just people that just recently have had interracial relationships or things like that.
Hmm.
And one time my aunt was visiting, and we got dinner with one of her like old friends. And somehow, I don't know how we started talking about race, but they didn't they had never put together the whole sorry to bring it up again, but the whole slavery aspect of it.
Please
And that
don't
that's why
apologize.
yeah.
Keep bringing it up.
And that's why many black Americans are light skinned, and that it wasn't,
Yeah.
you know, a lovely situation,
Yeah.
whereas in France it was usually on purpose and like
Hmm.
consensual because people fell in love and
Hmm.
things like that. And so that was interesting as well. So I
Yeah.
definitely was able to blend in more. Um, but just
Yeah.
and also I lived with a host family, so that was awesome, you know, talking with them about these things.
Yeah.
um and actually my host mom is from Spain, um but her son, so her son's dad, they're not together anymore, but her son's dad is from Africa, and so she had a mixed
Okay.
race son, and so that was
Hmm.
kind of cool too. And we
Hmm.
would actually talk about that every once in a while.
Hmm.
So yeah, anyways, so two places that had very different. But also, most importantly, in France, like, they really have a attitude where we don't talk about
Hmm.
race, you know? Like, she would talk about it with me because she
Yeah.
was very familiar with American culture, and she had an American boyfriend and things like that. But like, usually that's not something that they like to talk about at all. And like,
Yeah.
you're not, I think legally you're not able to collect data about someone's race on like a survey. Um,
Oh,
and
wow.
so it's just very much a we don't see color kind of society,
Okay.
which is a huge difference from China, which very much does see color, and
Yeah.
then the US, which is just really, I don't know what we're doing over here.
Yeah.
So just kind of
Does
being,
anyone?
does anyone? But I
Oh.
realized my takeaway from all of this, my many takeaways, but
Hmm.
one, of course, is patience and understanding that
Hmm.
people have different backgrounds and different understandings of things, and that's totally fine as long as we're all being respectful and talking about it.
Yeah.
um but also I realized that i'm I've gotten so comfortable with American perceptions of this, you know,
Hmm.
even though we're always complaining about it and we're always trying to fix it and better it. I realized that I was actually most comfortable with that. And
Yeah.
so it felt uncomfortable in these other situations just because it wasn't what I was used to, but it wasn't really better or worse ways of thinking about it. It was just different. And that's what
Yeah.
it made me uncomfortable. So yeah,
Hmm.
all of those were my big takeaways from that.
Wow. Okay. So this whole time I'm just sitting here thinking, I asked the perfect person for this topic. That is such an interesting and just really detailed, and you did a nice job explaining that shock that you went through. And in my culture shock lesson, we use the quote, "Not better, not worse, just
Mm,
different."
yeah,
And I
yeah,
do think that, yeah, traveling, you can only really get that feeling from traveling and experiencing
yeah.
a very different culture. I remember I was in Wuhan, China for
Mm,
about 3 months. And yeah, I had the same thought, like, this isn't, I'm not saying this is better or worse. It's just so
it's just
different and you're
different.
just completely out of your
Yeah.
element. But yeah, the whole topic of like your identity and how that's always just kind of been at the forefront, it sounds like. But
Yeah.
then even studying abroad, it was, but in a different way.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. Yeah.
and in everything you just said, I feel like there were four other topics that came out of
Yeah.
that I would like to spend more time on, but I'll bring you back.
Yeah. I
For
kept almost going, and I was like, all right, let me do the shortest possible version of
Yes,
this story.
I do not want to overlook systemic racism, the
Yeah.
history of slavery in the U.S., or any of those
Yeah.
topics. And I try to talk about them in my classes too.
Yeah.
So, but in the interest of time, we'll move on to number four, which I know you're a linguist too, so you'll like this question. And then we'll do the quote or idiom.
Cool.
So, as a linguist, do you have anything you'd like to share with students who speak French and speak Chinese, that are learning English? What do you think they might struggle with the most, or did you pick up anything while you were living there that might help them?
Yeah, because I you know, I thought about this question before, but right now in this moment, I flashed back to studying with my friends, and we were asking them um questions about Chinese, and they were asking us questions about English.
Mhm.
And I think one of the most frustrating things potentially as an English learner is the irregularities. Is that how we
Yeah,
say that word?
sure.
Just
Let's
all
make
the
it.
irregular things.
Yes.
um, and because you know, even as someone learning it as a first language, it's like, what do you mean that word is spelled that way? What? Like,
Yeah.
why?
Yeah.
And one way, this may not work for everyone, but I personally love etymology. And I shout out to History of English podcast. If
Oh,
anyone's interested in it's the history of the English language.
okay.
I'm like years behind in it, but I'm like in around Middle English. Like William the Conqueror just came. That's where I am right now. And it's a fascinating podcast. But before I started listening to it, I I was very kind of just like mad at English, and I was like, what is this? Why is it like this? And why is it so weird and irregular? But I really started to appreciate how much that island has been through linguistically and
Mm-hmm.
culturally. Like, you have all these different, like the Vikings and the Danes and the French and the Romans and the blah blah blah, like, and then of course the
Yes.
Anglo-Saxons who were already there. And like, so there's a reason that all these different influences, like people always say, oh, English is like three languages in a trench coat. um and have you heard that before?
Yes, I have
Yes.
actually.
Okay, good, good,
So cute.
good. I love that image.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking about that more helped me appreciate it more and not
Yeah.
be as mad at it. And I think embracing the irregularities,
Mm-hmm.
and and finding out those bits about etymology can
Mm-hmm.
sometimes be helpful and can help you with other words that have similar weird things going on. So
Yeah.
yeah, that would be a big piece of advice for me, is just knowing
Great.
that all we do is break rules in this
Yes.
language. Like that's just all it does, and that's just the language.
Mm-hmm.
And so embracing that and trying to your best to not be frustrated by it, and just to know that it takes time, and the
Mm-hmm.
more input that you have and the more practice that you do, like it will come. It's yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
very possible, and like you totally can do it, and you just have to be patient with yourself. I'd say that's my biggest
Oh,
advice.
such good advice from a true teacher. And I think that I've been experiencing that, and I'm sure you have in Chinese and French. With Spanish, I have
Mm.
decided to just let myself make mistakes. And I
Yes.
always start I work as a bilingual transition navigator, and so when I talk to my clients, I tell them I'm gonna make a lot of mistakes. Let's just talk about that right now, and then I feel
Yeah,
so comfortable just communicating rather than trying to sound perfect. So
exactly. That's
yes,
like the biggest thing that I tell my students, and especially because I teach a lot of young students. I
yeah,
mostly teach young kids Mandarin, and I just really want to get it in their heads early that language learning is making mistakes. Like,
absolutely.
people don't come out of the womb
Hmm.
speaking their first
Yeah,
language perfectly. That's not what
yeah,
happens. And
hmm,
that's a part of, and that's one of the things I loved about our program at Miss, is learning
yeah,
about the psychology behind error making, and that it
hmm,
really is part of the process. You have to make those mistakes in order to make that connection in your brain.
yeah,
And so you have to be patient with yourself and
yeah.
forgive yourself. Like, so
Hmm.
I'm also a sidebar, I'm an actor as well. For the listeners.
Just
um
time out. I'm bringing Lauren back. I've got so much to talk to her about. But
but
yes.
yeah, and in high school, one of the things we would say regarding like performing is forgive yourself immediately.
Mhm.
If you make a mistake on stage, you can't just be like, oh, like, no, you have to keep doing the show, nobody cares. And
Yes.
it's the same thing with language, what you just said about it's all about communicating.
Hmm.
So if you are just trying to be understood and really working through those issues, like that
Yeah.
is why we are here. So
Yes.
yeah.
I think that can be your start of a quote. Forgive yourself immediately. I love that.
Yes.
I'm gonna
Yes.
parse out all the things you've said. Such
Please.
wisdom, Lauren.
Oh boy.
And we're gonna transition into the last part of the podcast. I usually ask the guest to choose a quote, an idiom, or an expression related to culture shock, or just one that you personally like. Does anything come to mind?
I randomly, and first I need to know, I scrolled through like so many idioms. I was like, gosh, what's my idiom? But honestly, one thing that my grandpa says all the time, and he's a very positive, optimistic person.
Hmm.
He's 90 and he still has this like joy and optimism.
Love
He's
it.
a lot of times he says, that's the way the cookie crumbles. And it's so cute. But honestly, I was like, that kind of does relate to culture shock. Like
Yeah.
that's the way the cookie crumbles. And if anyone needs a translation of that, it's just kind of like it is what it is, which is a thing that my
Hmm.
dad says all the time. So
Hmm.
just accepting. things. And I guess that applies to language learning as well, what we were just talking about, like
Yeah.
accepting that you are where you are in your language journey. And it is what it is, and that's the way the cookie crumbles. And it's the same thing with different cultures, like they are how they are, and you can't change them, and you also shouldn't want to or try to change
Yeah.
them. It's just learning how you can fit in to that, and how you can still hold on to what makes you you and what your values are, but still be able to navigate that other culture respectfully, but still with curiosity and all of that. So just, I think acceptance is something that we don't always talk about, but is really important with languages and
Yeah.
cultures.
Absolutely. Did you take a lot of intercultural competency classes too?
I
With Netta?
I didn't really, I didn't really, but I like, so one of the French classes I took ended up just being, because like I took it just for like to take a French class, but it kind of ended up being about intercultural competence. And then I think that might have been the only one. But also, I feel like our program is just part of that too. And both of the Chinese classes I took actually weren't about that, but so I took classes where the three of us were non-native speakers and everyone else was a native speaker. And that was very, very stressful at the beginning, but our teacher, Dai Lao She, is just literally the greatest human ever. I love her so much. So she got us through that, and she believed in us and all of that. But we ended up talking about cultural differences a lot, and comparing especially American culture with Chinese and Taiwanese culture. And so so we ended up talking about that a lot of those classes, even though that wasn't strictly like the subject matter of
Yeah. So fascinating. So we're at the end, but I'm gonna have to invite you back. You have triggered a lot of topics that I'd like to discuss with you, and
totally.
It's been so much fun, Lauren. So thank you for taking the time. Like you mentioned, you're busy with acting, TikToking, teaching. She does it all, everybody. So seriously, Lauren, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and I hope to have you back soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the English with Grace podcast. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did like this episode, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and keep an eye out for more episodes coming soon.